Have you ever felt completely out of place in a room full of people who seem to belong everywhere you didn't? What if I told you that sometimes the most powerful moments of love happen when we're wearing our dirtiest clothes, and that a child's definition of family can shatter every assumption adults have about what really matters? Prepare yourself for the most heart-wrenching story you'll ever hear about how a 7-year-old boy's courage to love openly changed not just his life, but challenged an entire social system. This is the story of Maria Santos, a woman who wore a stained cleaning uniform to the most exclusive school in Manhattan, and how one little boy's public declaration of love exposed the difference between having everything and having what actually matters. I never imagined that cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors would lead me to the most important moment of my life. My name is Maria Santos, I'm 42 years old, and this is the story of how I went from being invisible to being the center of attention in a room full of billionaires, not because of what I owned but because of who chose to love me. 4 years ago, I came to America from a small town outside Guadalajara, with nothing but hope and desperation. I had lost my 7-year-old son Carlos in a car accident, and the grief had destroyed my marriage, my career as an elementary school teacher, and nearly my will to live. My mother was battling cancer, my younger sister needed money for nursing school, and I was the only one who could provide. So I did what millions of immigrants do, I took whatever work I could find. I became a housekeeper, earning $2,200 a month cleaning the homes of people who spent more on a single dinner than I made in a week. I worked for families who barely acknowledged my existence, who saw me as a service rather than a person, who never bothered to learn my name or ask about my life. But everything changed when I knocked on the door of 1247 Fifth Avenue, a $15 million penthouse owned by Jonathan Mitchell, one of New York's youngest billionaires. Jonathan Mitchell was 38 years old and worth $3.2 billion. He had built Mitchell Technologies from a startup in his Columbia University dorm room into one of the most successful AI companies in the world. He owned properties in Manhattan, the Hamptons, London, and Tokyo. His car collection was worth more than most people's homes, and his wine cellar contained bottles that cost more than I made in 6 months. But for all his success, Jonathan Mitchell was failing at the one job that mattered most, being a father to his 7-year-old son Tommy. Tommy's mother, Sarah, had died in a car accident 4 years earlier, leaving Jonathan to raise their son alone. Instead of processing his grief and learning to be a present father, Jonathan threw himself into work with obsessive intensity. He convinced himself that providing financially for Tommy was the same as providing emotionally, and that building a business empire was more important than building a relationship with his son. Tommy Mitchell was 7 years old and had learned to expect disappointment. His father missed school plays, birthday parties, and bedtime stories, always promising to make it up to him later but never following through. Tommy had been through 31 different nannies in 4 years. Some quit because of Jonathan's impossible demands, others because Tommy was labeled a difficult child who acted out for attention. The truth was that Tommy wasn't difficult, he was heartbroken. He was a little boy who desperately missed his mother, and whose father had emotionally abandoned him in everything but name. Tommy would ask me later why his daddy loved his phone more than him, and I wouldn't know how to answer. I started working for the Mitchell family on a rainy Tuesday in September. The current nanny, Patricia, met me at the door with a list of rules longer than my visa application. "Mr. Mitchell expects perfection," she said coldly. "Clean quietly, quickly, and invisibly. Don't interact with the child unless absolutely necessary. Tommy is challenging." My first glimpse of Tommy broke my heart. He was sitting alone in the massive living room, surrounded by toys that cost more than most families' monthly rent, but he looked sadder than any child should ever look. His hair was messy, his clothes were expensive but wrinkled, and his eyes held the kind of loneliness that I recognized because I carried it myself. Patricia was on her phone, completely ignoring Tommy as he tried to show her a drawing he had made. When he tugged on her sleeve, she snapped, "Tommy, I'm busy. Go play by yourself." The little boy's face crumpled, and he walked away clutching his artwork. I was supposed to be cleaning the windows, but I couldn't ignore what I had just witnessed. When Patricia left the room, I approached Tommy quietly. "That's a beautiful drawing," I said in my accented English. "Can you tell me about it?" Tommy looked up at me with surprise. No household staff had ever asked him about his art before. "It's my family," he said shyly. "That's me, that's my mommy in heaven, And that's my daddy, but he's always at work. In the drawing, Tommy had made himself very small. His mother was a figure floating above clouds, and his father was tiny in the distance behind what looked like a computer. It was the saddest representation of family I had ever seen. "You're a very good artist," I told him. "And you know what? I think your mommy would be very proud of this picture." Tommy's eyes lit up in a way that made my chest tight. When was the last time someone had praised this child? That first day, I broke every rule Patricia had given me. I helped Tommy with his snack, listened to him read a story from school, and when he got frustrated with his homework, I sat beside him and gently guided him through the math problems. I had been a teacher for 12 years before becoming a housekeeper. Helping children learn was as natural to me as breathing. Over the following weeks, I developed a secret routine with Tommy. I would arrive at 7 a.m. while Jonathan rushed off to important meetings, and Patricia would immediately disappear to make personal phone calls. Tommy would gravitate toward me like a plant seeking sunlight, hungry for any adult attention that felt genuine. I would clean around him while he did homework, helping with difficult words and math problems. I taught him simple Spanish phrases, made him healthy snacks that he actually wanted to eat, and listened to his endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to why his daddy was always angry. Tommy started calling me Mama Maria when we were alone. The first time he said it, I froze. I explained that I wasn't his mama, that I was just the cleaning lady. But Tommy, with the wisdom that children sometimes possess, said, "But you take care of me like a mama does. And my real mama is in heaven, so maybe she sent you to help." How do you argue with logic like that? I tried to maintain professional boundaries, but Tommy was healing something in me that had been broken since losing Carlos. Taking care of him, teaching him, watching him smile when someone showed interest in his thoughts and feelings. It was bringing back to life the part of me that I thought had died with my son. Meanwhile, Jonathan remained completely oblivious to the relationship developing between Tommy and me. He would come home after 8 p.m. most nights when Tommy was already asleep. On weekends, he would bring work home or take business calls, leaving Tommy to entertain himself in a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. The turning point came in November, when Tommy's school announced their annual Family Day, an event where parents would come to class to share their professions and spend time with their children. Tommy was excited for weeks, constantly asking his father if he would come to see his classroom and meet his teacher. Jonathan initially agreed, but as the date approached, a major business crisis emerged. A potential $2 billion merger with a Japanese tech company was falling apart, and Jonathan felt he had to fly to Tokyo immediately to save the deal. The night before Family Day, Jonathan broke the news to Tommy. "Son, I'm sorry, but I have to travel for work tomorrow. We'll do something special when I get back, I promise." Tommy's face crumpled with disappointment that was devastating to witness. "But Daddy, you promised. I told everyone my daddy was coming. I drew pictures for you." Jonathan, feeling guilty but convincing himself that business had to come first, said, "Tommy, sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices. This deal could secure your future. Patricia will take you to school tomorrow." But Patricia chose that moment to announce that she was quitting, effective immediately. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell, but I've received a better offer from a family that actually appreciates my work." She walked out, leaving Jonathan scrambling to find last-minute childcare for a son who was now crying inconsolably. That's when Jonathan made the decision that revealed everything about his priorities. Instead of canceling his trip to be with Tommy, he asked me to make sure Tommy got to school safely and to pick him up afterward. "It's just for one day," he said. "I'll be back tomorrow night." I wanted to tell him that he was making a terrible mistake, that his son needed him more than any business deal ever could. But I was just the housekeeper. Who was I to give parenting advice to a billionaire? The next morning, I took Tommy to school as requested. He was quiet during the car ride, staring out the window with the resigned sadness of a child who had learned not to expect too much from the adults in his life. When we arrived at the Riverside Academy, Manhattan's most exclusive private elementary school, I was stunned by the opulence. The building looked more like a palace than a school, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that probably cost more than most houses. I dropped Tommy off at his classroom, planning to pick him up at 3 p.m. as instructed. But as I was leaving the building, I heard crying coming from the playground. I looked through the window and saw Tommy sitting alone on a bench while other children played with their parents. The family day event was in full swing. Mothers in designer clothes and fathers in $1,000 suits were engaging with their children, participating in activities, and clearly enjoying the experience. Tommy sat by himself, watching other families with an expression of longing that broke my heart. I had planned to use those hours to clean 2 other apartments, earning the extra money I desperately needed. But seeing Tommy's pain reminded me of how I had felt as a child when my own father was too busy working to attend my school events. I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I walked back into that school, found Tommy on the playground and said, "Mijo, would you like me to stay for your family day?" Tommy's face transformed with joy. "Really? You would do that for me?" I nodded, even though I was acutely aware that I was wearing my cleaning uniform, a faded blue dress with stains from the morning's work, and looked completely out of place among the wealthy parents. "But Maria," Tommy said, suddenly worried, "you're not dressed like the other parents." I looked down at my uniform, then back at his hopeful face. "Sometimes the clothes don't matter as much as the heart wearing them," I told him. Tommy took my hand and led me into his classroom with pride that made me want to cry. "Mrs. Johnson," he called to his teacher. "This is my mom. She came for family day." Mrs. Johnson, a well-meaning but clearly flustered woman, looked at me with confusion. She knew Jonathan Mitchell by reputation, one of the school's wealthiest parents, and she was obviously trying to figure out how I fit into the family picture. "Oh," she said carefully, "I was expecting Mr. Mitchell today." Tommy, oblivious to the social awkwardness he was creating, explained enthusiastically, "My daddy had to work, but my mom came instead." The other parents in the classroom had stopped their conversations and were staring at us. I was the only person in the room wearing a uniform, the only one who clearly didn't belong to their social class, and the only one whose presence seemed to confuse everyone. But Tommy didn't care about any of that. He was beaming with happiness because someone had shown up for him. If you believe that love is more important than appearance, and that being present matters more than being perfect, leave the word present in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe because what happens next will show you how a child's definition of family can change everything. The family day activities began, and I tried to participate as normally as possible despite feeling completely out of place. The other parents were polite but distant, clearly unsure how to interact with someone who was obviously the help, rather than one of them. Tommy, however, was in his element. He proudly introduced me to his classmates. "This is my mom, Maria. She's teaching me Spanish and she makes the best quesadillas in the world." His enthusiasm was infectious, and some of the children began asking me questions about Mexico and Spanish words. But I could feel the judgment from the adults. I heard whispered conversations. "Is that really his mother? I thought Jonathan Mitchell's wife died years ago. She's obviously the nanny or housekeeper. How inappropriate." The most uncomfortable moment came when Mrs. Johnson asked parents to share their professions with the class. The other adults talked about being investment bankers, surgeons, lawyers, and CEOs. When it was my turn, Tommy jumped up excitedly. "My mom cleans houses," he announced proudly. "She's the best cleaner in the whole world. And she helps me with my homework. And she knows everything about everything." The silence in the room was deafening. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, not because I was ashamed of my work, but because I could see the pity and condescension in the other parents' eyes. But Tommy wasn't finished. With the fearless honesty that only children possess, he continued, "My mom takes care of me better than my real daddy does. My daddy is always working and he doesn't have time to play with me or help me with school. But Maria always has time for me." Mrs. Johnson tried to redirect the conversation, clearly uncomfortable with Tommy's public criticism of his father. But the damage was done. The whole room had heard a 7-year-old boy essentially say that the family housekeeper was more of a parent to him than his billionaire father. After the presentations, we moved to the playground for outdoor activities. I was helping Tommy with a science project when I overheard 2 mothers talking nearby. "Can you imagine?" one said. "That poor little boy is so confused about family relationships. Someone should call child services." "I heard his father is never around," the other replied. "It's so sad when money can't buy good parenting." I wanted to defend Jonathan, to explain that he was grieving and doing his best, but how could I? Tommy's own words had revealed the truth that I had been trying to ignore. This child was being emotionally neglected by the person who should love him most. The final activity of the day was a family portrait session where parents and children would pose for photos together. I tried to decline, explaining that I wasn't really Tommy's family, but he grabbed my hand with desperate determination. "Please, Maria," he pleaded. "I want a picture with you. You're the only mom I have now. How could I refuse?" We posed together, a 7-year-old boy in his expensive school uniform and a 42-year-old woman in her stained cleaning clothes. And I knew that this photo would capture something real and beautiful, even if it wasn't conventional. As we were leaving the school, Tommy hugged me tightly and said, "Thank you for coming to my family day. You made it the best day ever." I hugged him back, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. What I didn't know was that another parent had taken a video of Tommy introducing me as his mom and posted it on social media. The caption read, "When the housekeeper shows up for family day because dad is too busy making money to spend time with his son. This is what love actually looks like." The video went viral within hours. By the time Jonathan's plane landed at JFK the next evening, #DirtyUniform was trending on Twitter, and his son's face was all over the internet. The video had been shared by celebrities, commented on by child advocacy groups, and turned into memes about parental priorities. Jonathan arrived home to find his doorman handing him printed screenshots of social media posts, his phone buzzing with calls from reporters, and a stack of messages from his publicist. But none of that mattered when he walked into his penthouse and saw Tommy sitting quietly in the living room, looking smaller and sadder than ever. "Tommy," Jonathan said, dropping his briefcase and kneeling in front of his son. "I saw a video online. Can you tell me what happened at school yesterday?" Tommy looked at his father with eyes that seemed older than 7. "Maria came to my family day because you were working. She wore her cleaning clothes and all the other parents stared at us. But she stayed with me all day and helped me with projects and took pictures with me." Jonathan felt something twist in his chest. "Tommy, Maria isn't your mother. You understand that, right?" Tommy's response shattered Jonathan's heart. "I know she's not my real mom. My real mom is in heaven. But Maria takes care of me like a mom does. She helps me with homework and makes me food and listens when I talk. You just work all the time." The brutal honesty of his son's words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Here was his 7-year-old child, calmly explaining that the woman who cleaned their toilets was a better parent than he was. "Where is Maria now?" Jonathan asked quietly. "She's in the kitchen," Tommy said. "She made dinner, but she said she would leave if you were mad at her." Jonathan found me in the kitchen, packing up the meal I had prepared for Tommy. I was expecting to be fired, possibly sued, definitely blamed for the social media embarrassment I had caused. "Maria," Jonathan said, and I turned to face him, my heart racing. "We need to talk." I nodded, prepared for the worst. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry about what happened at the school. I never meant to cause problems. Tommy was so sad, and I couldn't leave him alone." Jonathan looked at me for a long moment, then asked a question I wasn't expecting. "How long has my son been calling you mom?" I felt my face flush. "Mr. Mitchell," I tried to correct him. I told him I was just the housekeeper. But he said. I trailed off, not wanting to repeat Tommy's words about how I cared for him better than his father did. "What did he say?" Jonathan pressed. Took a deep breath. "He said I take care of him like a mother does, and that his real mother sent me to help." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "Tell me about your son." I stared at him in confusion. "My son? I did some research during my flight," Jonathan said quietly. "Maria Santos, former elementary school teacher from Guadalajara, lost her 7-year-old son Carlos in a car accident 3 years ago. Immigrated to the United States 2 years ago. Works multiple cleaning jobs to support her mother's cancer treatment and her sister's education." I felt tears forming in my eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand now," he interrupted gently. "Why you connected with Tommy. Why he connected with you. You both lost someone important, and you found each other." I nodded, not trusting my voice to speak. Jonathan continued. "Maria, I owe you an apology. And more than that, I owe you gratitude. That video was embarrassing, yes, but it was also a wake-up call. I've been so focused on providing for Tommy financially that I forgot to provide for him emotionally. You're a good father, I said automatically, trying to be diplomatic. Jonathan shook his head. No, I'm not. A good father would have been at that family day. A good father would know his son well enough to realize he's been attaching himself to you because I haven't been available. A good father wouldn't let his housekeeper be a better parent than he is. The conversation was interrupted by Tommy appearing in the kitchen doorway. Are you going to send Maria away? He asked anxiously. Jonathan looked at his son, then at me, then back at Tommy. That depends, he said. Maria, would you be interested in a different kind of job? I looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? I mean, I want to hire you not as a housekeeper, but as Tommy's full-time caregiver and tutor. I'll sponsor your permanent residency, pay for you to get your teaching credentials recognized in the U.S., and provide a salary that reflects the value of what you're really doing raising my son. I stared at him in shock. Mr. Mitchell, I don't understand. Why would you do that? Jonathan smiled at Tommy, who was looking between us with hope and confusion. Because my son is right. You do take care of him better than I do. And instead of being threatened by that, I want to learn from it. And because, he continued looking directly at me, that video showed me something I'd been too blind to see. Love isn't about wearing the right clothes or having the right job or saying the right things. It's about showing up. And you showed up for my son when I didn't. Tommy ran to hug both of us, and in that moment, I realized that sometimes families aren't formed by biology or marriage or adoption papers. Sometimes they're formed by love, commitment, and the courage to show up for each other when it matters most. 6 months later, Tommy started calling me Mama Maria, in public without embarrassment, and Jonathan started coming home at 6 p.m. instead of 8. I was enrolled in a teacher certification program, working toward my New York State teaching license, with full tuition paid by the Mitchell Foundation. But more importantly, our unconventional family had found its rhythm. Jonathan learned to be present for school events, bedtime stories, and weekend adventures. I learned to see myself not as an employee, but as an integral part of a family that chose to love across all boundaries. And Tommy learned that love comes in many forms, that families can be created as well as born, and that sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones who show up in dirty uniforms and clean hearts. The media attention eventually died down, but the lesson remained. In a world obsessed with appearances, status, and wealth, a child's definition of family reminded everyone what actually matters. Not what you wear, but how you care. Not what you own, but how you love. Because at the end of the day, the most beautiful families aren't the ones that look perfect in photos. They're the ones that choose each other, support each other, and show up for each other, no matter what they're wearing. 2 years later, at Tommy's elementary school graduation, I sat in the front row wearing a beautiful dress that Jonathan had bought for the occasion. But when Tommy gave his graduation speech, he said something that brought the entire audience to tears. I want to thank my family for helping me learn and grow. My dad taught me that it's never too late to change and be better. And my mom Maria taught me that love doesn't care about what country you're from, or what clothes you wear. She taught me that family is about who takes care of your heart. 2 years ago, I was sad because I thought I didn't have a mom. But I learned that sometimes angels come disguised as cleaning ladies, and sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, not the ones you're born into. As Tommy walked across that stage to receive his diploma, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. From a dirty uniform and an uncomfortable family day to a chosen family built on love, respect, and the courage to show up for each other. I had come to America with nothing but hope. I had worked in dirty uniforms and been treated as invisible by people who had everything money could buy. But in the end, I discovered that the richest families aren't the ones with the most money. They're the ones with the most love. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love finds you in the most unexpected places, wearing the most unlikely clothes, and changes your life forever. If this story reminded you that love has nothing to do with status and everything to do with showing up, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about someone who chose to love you when you needed it most, regardless of appearances or circumstances. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about love, family, and the courage to care for each other across all boundaries. Because in a world that judges by appearances, We all need reminders that the most beautiful love stories often begin with the most ordinary people doing the most extraordinary things. Remember that your own love matters, your own presence has power, and somewhere, someone needs exactly the kind of care that only you can provide. Because we're all just people trying to love and be loved, and sometimes the most important families are the ones we create by choosing to show up for each other, dirty uniforms and all.